Hey guys, tonight we're stepping straight into the dim glow of an early colonial American parlor. Picture it, the fire's low, the air is thick with the scent of wood smoke and boiled wool, and somewhere behind you a stern chaperone rustles in her chair, never quite taking her eyes off you. Your heart beats just a little faster, not with passion, but with the mortal terror that you might spill your cider on the one rug your host owns. You can practically hear the ticking of the clock, except it's actually a neighbour's bored child tapping her shoes in time to your awkward attempts at small talk. Colonial America's marriage customs weren't just peculiar, they were a unique blend of survival strategy, religious duty, and public spectacle. Forget dreamy candlelit dinners, you're far more likely to be sitting in a drafty room, clutching a slightly bruised apple, and hoping you don't say something scandalous like "nice weather we're having."
The stakes? Well, in a tiny community where everyone knows your business, and your mothers and your great uncles, it's not just your heart on the line. One wrong move, and you could be the talk of the town for weeks.
You probably won't survive this with your dignity entirely intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location and local time in the comments below.
Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge up the uneven plank steps to a neighbour's house, invited not just for supper, but for something far more nerve-wracking, a courtship visit.
The room is arranged with deliberate discomfort, a pair of hard wooden chairs facing each other, perhaps a chaperone seated unreasonably close by, knitting with suspicious vigour. The fire doesn't quite warm the corners, and the candles gutter in their holders, casting shadows that stretch across your fidgeting hands. Colonial courting rituals aren't about sparks or moonlit walks. They're more like an exercise in not embarrassing yourself. You're expected to make polite conversation about crops, rainfall, or perhaps the merits of a sturdy ox, while giving away nothing that could be deemed too forward. If you're lucky, you'll get a laugh out of your intended, maybe when you both reach for the cider at the same time, fingers brushing with all the electricity of a wool blanket. Most likely your main concern is not sneezing at an inopportune moment and being remembered as that one with the ferocious sneeze. As you glance around, you notice that every movement is observed and catalogued. The chaperone knits a little faster whenever the conversation dips, and the family dog snores judgmentally at your feet. It's a strange comfort in the formality, though. After all, you're not expected to sweep anyone off their feet. In fact, if you did, you'd probably be banned from visiting ever again. Courtship is a communal event. Your feelings are important, sure, but only just after the opinions of the town elders, your parents, your intended parents, and maybe the postman. Historically, some colonial communities devised elaborate games and parlour amusements designed to give couples a chance to interact, though never too closely. Questions and commands might have you reciting poetry or answering riddles, all with the goal of proving wit and virtue, not charm or romance. Mainstream historians note these activities weren't just for fun. They serve to assess character, patience, and the all-important ability to endure endless awkward silences. Yet not every colony played by the same rules. In New England, the Puritans watched courtships like hawks.
In the more relaxed middle colonies, you might get away with a supervised stroll outdoors, so long as you stayed in sight of a dozen windows. And over in the Dutch-influenced Hudson Valley, there are quirky tales of kissing games at barn raisings, but of course historians still argue whether these playful customs were truly widespread or just wishful thinking retold by bored old men with nothing better to gossip about.
You can't help but notice the immense pressure. Marry well, and you bring honour and hopefully a couple of cows to your family misstep. And you risk being branded a spinster or a laughingstock. It's not just romance at stake, it's social survival. The tension runs deep. You might hear a neighbour mutter, "Remember what happened to the miller's girl last spring?" And suddenly your palms sweat. Let's not forget the most fringe detail,
In some regions, parents would purposely schedule overlapping courtship visits for eligible young men.
Picture yourself trying to impress your intended while another suitor sits across the room, both of you carefully ignoring each other as you discuss the virtues of crop rotation. It's like colonial speed dating, minus the anonymity, or speed. Tonight, you try your best to stay composed. Every gesture offering the best seat, refilling a cup, picking up a dropped handkerchief is weighed and occasionally misinterpreted. A dropped fork could launch a week of speculation. Are you clumsy? Or perhaps too nervous, which could be good, shows you care, or bad, suggests weak nerves unfit for harsh winters. But beneath all this orchestrated tension, there's an odd kind of intimacy. You catch a fleeting glance, a shy smile, maybe a shared eye roll at the chaperone's theatrics. This is courtship, colonial style, not fireworks but flickers, not whispered declarations, but whispered prayers that you'll survive another evening without committing a social catastrophe. As you shuffle out at the end of the night, you realize you've passed the first test. The door closes behind you, and the cold air feels like freedom. Will your next visit be less excruciating? Historians still argue whether people actually enjoyed these rituals, or simply endured them because really, what was the alternative? Life on the edge of civilization was no place to be choosy. But for now, you walk home, lantern swinging, heart oddly lighter. You've survived Paula. The cows are safe. Your dignity is mostly intact, and tomorrow the rumors will begin, because after all, in colonial America, everybody's business is everybody's business. You return home from your harrowing parlor visit, your head buzzing with every word you said and every fumble you made, only to learn that your next ordeal isn't a stroll, a supper, or a community dance. No, tonight's test comes in the form of a piece of furniture, the infamous bundling board. It's about as romantic as a splinter, and twice as awkward. In many colonial households, especially those rooted in New England's Puritan ways, young couples were sometimes allowed to court with a strange kind of privacy. Together, after dark, in the same bed, but separated by a wide wooden plank called a bundling board. If you've never heard of bundling, imagine lying fully clothed under a mound of scratchy wool blankets with the object of your affections, and a 2-inch thick slab of pine stretching the length of the bed between you. Privacy in this case is a relative concept. The family would be just downstairs, or in some cases in the very same room, pretending to ignore you while missing nothing. Your first impression of the board is that it's either a wildly creative device to foster conversation, or a direct challenge to your willpower. In reality, the bundling board was a practical solution to a practical. There were not enough rooms in colonial homes for true privacy, and the social pressure to marry quickly and to the right person was real. Allowing suitors to spend the night with a physical barrier was a compromise that let romance develop without theoretically endangering virtue. It's a system designed by people who trusted furniture more than hormones. Of course, nothing about this arrangement feels normal. You and your would-be partner, bundled like two squirmy loaves of bread, whisper through the night. The wood feels cold and slightly damp against your elbow, and you're painfully aware of every sound, from the creak of the bed to the muted giggles of younger siblings eavesdropping through the wall. The only thing separating you from complete scandal is that trusty board and the threat of having to explain yourself to an entire congregation if things get out of hand. There's a mainstream historical fact here. Bundling was a widely recognized colonial practice, especially in rural New England and parts of the middle colonies. Some towns even had established bundling beds for courting couples, a sign that for all their rigidity, communities acknowledged the need for a bit of flexibility. Yet, historians still argue whether bundling was ever as innocent as church records claimed. Diaries and court documents hint at a much livelier scene where boards occasionally slipped and the occasional baby arrived suspiciously soon after a wedding. Still, for every story of boundary pushing, there are others of genuine connection. In the absence of cell phones, candlelit bundling hours were an opportunity for conversation, sometimes awkward, sometimes earnest, without the pressure of a watching crowd. Here you learn about your potential partner's favorite song, their hopes for the future, and whether they snore. Bundling wasn't always about rigid boards. In some communities, especially among the Pennsylvania Dutch and other immigrant groups, bundling bags were used. Basically an oversized sleeping bag sewn to keep two people warm, but securely separated. The frayed edges of this custom reveal how marriage rituals adapted to climate, culture, and available resources. Imagine the challenge of conducting a first date in a sleeping bag, while your would-be in-laws debate the weather just beyond the curtain. A favorite quirky tidbit, there were bundling bags with ingenious knots and fastenings, requiring the couple to untangle themselves only with considerable teamwork. Nothing says compatibility like collaborating to escape woolen confinement before dawn. If you think modern dating apps have strange icebreakers, colonial America would like to offer you a literal knot to untie. It's easy to imagine how these customs might have played out differently depending on your family's status. A prominent family might host their children's suitors in the parlor, no bundling required, public enough to guarantee good behavior. Meanwhile, a struggling farmer's family pressed for space and heat, leaned on tradition and planks to create safe intimacy. As you settle into your scratchy side of the bed, the sheer absurdity of the situation hits you. Here you are, caught between courtship and scandal, hoping the board holds, and not just physically. Every night spent bundling, every whispered hope or shy giggle becomes part of a larger story. Community memory is long, and stories about that winter the board broke live on for generations, occasionally trotted out to embarrass a new crop of hopeful suitors. Some argue bundling was a genuinely effective way to slow down romance, to force would-be couples to actually talk. Others claim it was an elaborate charade that everyone pretended to believe in, while quietly forgiving the inevitable consequences. After all, colonial society needed marriages to keep growing. You're left, as always, with a question. Did the bundling board truly keep young hearts pure, or was it just a wooden invitation to test boundaries? Either way, as the candle burns down, you finally drift toward sleep, soothed more by exhaustion than passion. Bundling isn't quite what you expected, but you survived it. No scandal yet, no injuries unless you count splinters, and one more strange story stitched into the quilt of colonial courtship. The sun rises, casting pale light over the frost-dusted rooftops of your sleepy colonial village. Today you learn that marriage isn't always a matter of two people standing side by side at the altar, looking into each other's eyes. Sometimes you're married before you ever meet, or while you're oceans apart. Welcome to the odd world of marriage by proxy. Imagine waking up to find out you've been betrothed to someone who is currently 3,000 miles away, likely sporting an entirely different haircut and possibly a much better sense of humor. In early colonial America, this wasn't just an occasional oddity, it was a practical if peculiar solution to life on the edge of the known world. When distance, dangerous seas, or political drama kept couples apart, the next best thing was a stand-in. Picture yourself standing in a small wooden church surrounded by fidgeting witnesses and one very nervous prop. This poor soul may be your cousin, a loyal friend, or the unlucky neighbor who owed your father a favor, stands before the minister in your stead, reciting vows and exchanging symbolic tokens. All the while, you're hundreds or even thousands of miles away, maybe pacing a candlelit bedroom in London, or watching the Atlantic crash against Plymouth rocky shore. The proxy isn't just a placeholder. Legally they stand in for you, hand over ring, and even promise to be true on your behalf. The awkwardness of the situation is almost unimaginable. If the stand-in trips over the vows, or forgets your betrothed's name, does it count? Historians still argue whether such ceremonies were always legally binding, or if they sometimes created endless confusion. Did two stand-ins ever end up accidentally married to each other? If you ask the town gossips, probably. This tradition had deep roots in European law, where royal and noble families often used marriage by proxy to cement alliances, move property, and, very occasionally, spark scandals. In colonial America, it was often about practicality. Atlantic crossings could take months or even years, and for many, waiting simply wasn't an option. The colonies needed stability, property needed inheriting, and sometimes any marriage was preferable to none. After all, who has time for romance when you're also battling smallpox, crop failure, and the constant threat of a bear eating your chickens? Here's a mainstream fact. Marriage by proxy did happen, though it was far more common among the well-to-do or those with property at stake. Letters would crisscross the ocean, arranging details, confirming intentions, and sometimes including carefully described likenesses of the absent bride or groom, because nothing says "I love you" like a poorly drawn portrait and a sternly worded letter from your future in-laws. On the quirky side, some communities developed elaborate rituals to make these proxy ceremonies less dreary. In one recorded case, the stand-in for a missing bride actually wore a makeshift veil and, for good measure, borrowed the bride's slippers. It's hard to say who was more nervous, the stand-in, the real groom, or the bride listening from afar, knowing her fate rested on a stranger's ability to not faint. For families with fewer resources, a proxy marriage was a gamble. You might not even see your new spouse until a year or two later, when a creaky ship finally made it to port. Imagine the tension when you recognize each other. Will the marriage hold up to the realities of colonial life, or did your stand-in oversell your charm and knitting skills? Some couples thrived, while others unraveled spectacularly at the first sign of hardship. It's the original blind date, but with a lot more legal paperwork and no chance of ghosting anyone. One fringe tidbit that rarely makes the history books: occasionally both the bride and groom were absent, and two proxies conducted the entire ceremony on their behalf. Local legend has it that, in one Massachusetts town, the proxies enjoyed the wedding feast so much they became a couple themselves. Whether or not that's true, it certainly added spice to an otherwise dry occasion. Of course, marriage by proxy was not without controversy. Religious authorities sometimes balked, worried that these unions might circumvent moral codes or lead to future disputes. Historians still debate whether communities truly accepted these arrangements, or just tolerated them out of necessity. Would you trust your cousin to make the right vows for you? Would you feel truly married, standing halfway around the world while someone else slipped a ring on your absent finger? Despite the oddness, marriage by proxy offered real hope and security in a world where separation was often beyond anyone's control. It gave families a way to cement ties, protect inheritances, and just maybe find happiness at the end of a very long journey. The downside? You're stuck with whatever rumors the proxy manages to generate, especially if he's known for dramatic storytelling or an inability to resist the punch bowl at the after party. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine a world where you might be married tomorrow, even if you're still waiting for your ship to come in. It's not the fairy tale ending you'd see in a movie, but in colonial America, practicality almost always won out over passion.
And if nothing else, you'll have a story to tell, one that starts with the phrase, "You'll never believe who stood in for me at my wedding."
The morning mist curls along the muddy lane as you shuffle toward your neighbor's farmhouse, clutching a woven basket. Today's mission is not romantic, at least not by modern standards.
You're here to negotiate the finer points of a marriage agreement, and it's less about hearts and flowers, more about livestock and linens. Yes, in early colonial America, the union of two people is often sealed not with whispered words,
but with the clink of coins and the oinking of pigs. Welcome to the world of bride price and bartering, where love might be blind, but it's definitely not free. You glance at the list in your hand. 3 healthy chickens, 2 bolts of homespun linen, a cask of cider, and, if your luck holds, the promise of a sturdy milk cow. As you enter the kitchen, you see the future bride's father already sizing you up like a merchant at market, his eyes darting from your boots to the basket. This isn't a one-sided affair, though. Your own parents are there too, armed with opinions and memories of every marital exchange that's ever happened in town. The negotiations are performed with a solemnity usually reserved for funerals. Every item on the table represents weeks or months of labor. The chickens, raised from hatchlings, kept safe from foxes. The linen, woven during long dark winters. Even the cider carries with it the memory of autumn harvests. You watch as your father tries to play it cool, feigning indifference to the goat tied up outside, while your mother pointedly mentions that last year's bride came with a brand new spinning wheel. This practice of dowries, bride prices, and exchanges is a mainstream fact of life in colonial America. Depending on where you live and which cultural traditions your family carries, the exact items might change, but the concept remains the same. In English and Dutch settlements, the bride's family often provides a dowry, household goods, land, or money meant to help the young couple set up a home. In other cases, the groom's family pays a bride price to compensate the bride's parents for the loss of a hard-working daughter, who, let's face it, probably does more before breakfast than most of us manage in a week. Yet, historians still argue whether these transactions were truly about economics, or if they carried deeper social meanings. Was a dowry just insurance against future hardship? Or was it a way for families to subtly rank themselves against neighbours? In some circles, the bigger the dowry, the higher the bride's social standing and the juicier the gossip, if the union fails to last. It's not all solemn exchanges, though. Fringe stories abound, like the tale of a groom in rural Virginia who, lacking anything valuable, famously bartered his prized pet turkey for his beloved. The turkey, it said, strutted around the wedding feast as a sort of feathery best man, and the marriage lasted longer than most. Another quirky tidbit: in some outlying settlements, families have been known to throw in a barrel of pickles, a well-made hat, or even a reliable axe as part of the deal. Nothing says everlasting love like the promise of decent headwear. You try to keep a straight face as the negotiations continue. The bride-to-be hovers in the next room, listening to every word. In some households she may even have a say, though more often her opinion is filtered through the family grapevine. Occasionally a wise grandmother or meddling aunt will insert herself, advocating for more blankets or a better brand of soap. It's a group effort, and the tension is palpable. Modern ears might cringe at the transactional nature of it all, but in a world where survival is a daily struggle, every item is an investment in the future. With each hen and bolt of cloth, you're not just buying into a marriage, you're securing your next winter, hedging against bad harvests, and creating alliances that might mean the difference between comfort and catastrophe. There are, of course, regional differences. In New England, where Puritan values run deep, the dowry is practical, maybe a cow or a spinning wheel, and if you're lucky, a sturdy feather mattress. In the more cosmopolitan middle colonies, you might find silver spoons, books, or the occasional heirloom clock changing hands. Down in the southern colonies, the stakes are higher. Land, livestock, and even enslaved people become part of the grim arithmetic of marital union. You notice how careful everyone is to maintain dignity throughout the negotiation. The bride's father never looks too eager, and your own family is careful not to overplay their hand. It's a delicate dance, somewhere between commerce and ceremony, with each party hoping to walk away feeling just a little bit cleverer than the other. As the agreement is finally struck, a handshake, a nod, perhaps the solemn passing of a pewter mug, The mood shifts. Tension gives way to relief. Sometimes even laughter. The turkey, if present, gobbles its approval. And somewhere in the shadows, the bride and groom share a quick conspiratorial glance, perhaps reassured that if nothing else, their marriage will always be remembered for the great pickle-barrel debate of...
Of course, the local minister must eventually bless the union, but it's the bartering that cements the marriage in the minds of the families. Years from now, people will recall your wedding not by the number of guests or the taste of the cake, but by whether you managed to secure a second cow or ended up with the world's most opinionated turkey.
As you walk home, clutching a slightly lopsided basket, minus a few chickens, but plus a signed marriage contract, you realize that colonial marriage isn't so much about happily ever after as it is about mutual survival and a bit of healthy haggling. In a world where you can literally marry for pickles, you learn to take your victories where you find them. The newly minted agreement sits heavy in your pocket as you step out into the afternoon haze. It's official. You're one step closer to being married. But the next obstacle isn't a secret rendezvous, a wooden barrier, or a bartering table.
No, now your fate is in the hands of the colony's most formidable force, the local matchmakers, a crew of town elders and busybodies with a knack for helping you find the right path, whether you want their help or not. You might imagine a matchmaker as some mystical old woman, humming over a bubbling cauldron and reading tea leaves. But in early colonial America, matchmaking is far less mystical and much more institutional.
Think of a committee meeting at your least favorite workplace. Only everyone is twice as nosy and 3 times as invested in your personal business. The Puritans, those stalwart defenders of virtue and good order, prized community stability above individual romance. Love might grow after marriage, but order must come first. You find yourself summoned, perhaps by a sharp rap on your door, or a note slipped into your hands at church. The matchmakers are ready to discuss your prospects. Your family is already there, seated rigidly on the hard benches. On the other side of the room sit your potential in-laws, all equally uncomfortable. The elders 3, sometimes 5, survey you with the piercing gaze of people who have memorized every infraction since you were in swaddling clothes. The conversation is direct. They want to know if you own land, how many cows you milk, what skills you bring to the marriage. Can you read? Can you split logs without embarrassing yourself? One kindly elder leans forward and asks, "Have you any vices, child?" You try to hide your love of cider and your tendency to nap during sermons, offering only a sheepish shrug. Mainstream historians note that Puritan matchmakers were often ministers or respected townsfolk, tasked with keeping the peace and upholding community values. Their approval wasn't just a courtesy, it was a requirement. Without it, you might find your intended partner suddenly less available for bundling, or your name dropped from the prayer list, which in colonial America was a fate worse than public stocks. And so, the questioning continues. They weigh your reputation, your work ethic, your church attendance, and not least, your ability to produce grandchildren, preferably a dozen or more, to populate the colony and hedge against high mortality. Every answer is measured, every hesitation noted. The air in the room is thick with the scent of fear, sweat, and fresh-baked bread. Someone always brings bread. Of course, these matchmakers are not above the occasional fringe maneuver. Stories float through the colonies of matches made and unmade by rumour, or by the strategic intervention of a well-connected neighbour. There's the tale of old Miss Finley who tried to pair his daughter with every eligible bachelor in 3 counties, only to see her elope with the town blacksmith. Then there's the legend of a matchmaker who orchestrated a triple wedding to maximize the efficiency of her meddling. Was it love, or just a way to save on church candles? Historians still argue whether matchmakers wielded real power, or whether their authority only worked when it suited the more rebellious members of the community. You sit through the grilling, keeping your answers polite and vague. When asked about your intentions, you recite the expected lines: to build a good home, to work hard, to honor God, and maybe to keep the goats out of the kitchen for once. One matchmaker gives you a slow nod, clearly remembering the unfortunate cheese incident last spring. Occasionally, a matchmaker will offer unsolicited advice. Marry for piety, not for pretty, they might say, glancing pointedly at your new hat. A sturdy wife is worth 2 dandy husbands. Another will chime in, adjusting her own formidable bonnet. You nod and smile, careful not to show your teeth too much. Exuberant displays of joy are considered unseemly. After the meeting, your family gathers to discuss the verdicts. Approval means wedding plans can finally proceed, pending the next 3 layers of scrutiny, of course. This approval means a long winter of suspicious glances at church and whispered prayers that the matchmakers will take pity on you next season. You might think all this scrutiny would dampen the mood, but there's a peculiar comfort in it too. At least you know what's expected, and if you manage to please the elders, you'll have a lifetime's worth of allies on your side. Plus, if the marriage ever goes awry, you'll have an entire council of people who can say, well, we warned you about his goats. On your way home, you pass neighbours whispering in doorways, and children giggling behind fences. You're already the talk of the town, your fate dissected over stews and at spinning wheels. It's exhausting, and a little bit thrilling. You try to remember if you've ever slighted any of the matchmakers, just in case you need to apologise with a fresh loaf or a jar of apple butter. In the end, colonial matchmaking is less about romance than about ensuring the colony survives another season, and if love happens to blossom along the way, so much the better.
You sigh, grateful. The ordeal is over, at least for now. The elders have spoken. The bread is gone. And you still have both your hat and your dignity. Word spreads fast in a colonial village.
Before you've had time to polish your shoes or comb the dust out of your hair, it seems everyone already knows you've passed the gauntlet of the matchmakers. But before you can rest easy, you must face yet another rite, the public announcements and bans. Think of it as social media oversharing, colonial edition, except instead of a humble brag on your timeline, it's your business being shouted from a pulpit. Sunday morning arrives with the usual flutter of anticipation and dread. The entire community gathers at the meeting house, women in stiff bonnets, men in their best, often only coats, and a gaggle of children already whispering about who might trip on the church steps. You slide into your pew, hands sweaty, as the minister begins the service with a voice as steady as the old wooden beams above you. Then, just as your mind drifts toward thoughts of lunch, your name rings out loud and clear. Let it be known, the minister proclaims, that John Smith and Mary Brown seek to be joined in holy matrimony. If any here know cause why they may not lawfully wed, let them speak now, or forever hold their peace.
Your ears burn. Every face turns, some with curiosity, others with envy, and a few with the unmistakable gleam of a neighbour desperate to share a half-remembered tale from your childhood. The first reading of the bans is just that, the first. This process repeats for 3 consecutive Sundays.
Each time, your name hangs in the air, giving anyone with an objection, however outlandish, a chance to raise their hand. You might think your skeletons are safely locked away, but colonial society is positively built for digging up old bones. This practice isn't a colonial quirk, but a mainstream fact imported from English law, designed to prevent bigamy, underage marriages, or unions that might violate church or civil rules, and serve as both warning and invitation. If someone objects, things can get complicated. Maybe a rival suitor steps forward, or a long-lost cousin emerges with news of a pre-existing engagement made back in England, sometimes real, sometimes entirely fabricated. It's not all high drama, though. Sometimes objections are downright ridiculous. There's the story of a man who tried to halt a wedding by claiming the bride once stole his favorite pie recipe. Historians still argue whether public bans genuinely protected communities from scandal or just gave busybodies a legitimate reason to air old grievances. Of course, there are fringe alternatives. In some smaller, less formal communities, especially among Quakers or in remote settlements, bans might be replaced by a simple posting on the meeting house door, or even an announcement at the local mill. If you're truly unlucky, your bans might coincide with the annual sheep shearing, ensuring your impending marriage is the talk of every bleating mouth in town. You sit through it all, week after week, listening to whispered commentary and trying to keep your expression neutral. The suspense grows with each repetition. You scan the congregation, searching for that one person who might object, maybe the neighbour whose fence you accidentally knocked down, or the childhood friend who once lost a game of marbles to you and never quite recovered. Once the third reading passes without incident, relief washes over you. You can almost hear a collective sigh from your family who dreaded the revival of that unfortunate sledding accident, and from your intended who perhaps feared an ex would show up with a long memory and a louder voice. Then there are the quiet, comedic moments. The youngest children, blissfully unaware of the social stakes, stage whispered bets on who's next. The oldest ladies in the congregation nod approvingly, already speculating about the wedding feast. And somewhere near the back, a bored farmhand quietly falls asleep, snoring through the final prayer. Once the banns are complete, you're nearly there. The community's blessing, reluctant or not, has been secured. Now the wedding can proceed, and the gossip can finally shift from speculation to celebration. Historians debate the true power of these announcements. Did they genuinely prevent trouble, or just delay it? Did they provide transparency, or just more opportunities for drama? Colonial life, as ever, is a delicate dance between tradition and personal ambition. You leave the meeting house under the weight of many eyes, but your step is a little lighter. The finish line is in sight, though you know more rituals, more scrutiny, and perhaps a few more jokes at your expense still lie ahead. For now, you made it through the social gauntlet. Your name called, your secret safe, your path to the altar clear, until next Sunday, of course, when your name will ring out again, just in case anyone missed it the first time. Now that the bans have been read, the entire village knows your intentions. Even the geese seem to honk in recognition as you pass. But in colonial America, the winding path to marriage isn't always so straightforward, especially if you're a woman. The fate of spinsters, widows, and those who hope for second chances is tangled up in community tradition, social expectations, and the unpredictable hand of fortune. As you walk down the rutted lane, you catch a glimpse of Miss Abigail Turner, whose reputation for sharp wit and stubborn independence is legendary. Abigail is what the village kindly calls a spinster, an unmarried woman of a certain age. The word carries a heavy load, whispering that she's missed her chance, though most spinsters would likely argue they've dodged a bullet. In truth, the colonies need every able hand, and unmarried women often become the backbone of community life, running shops, teaching children, or helping birth half the town's babies. Still, the whispers persist. The phrase old maid hovers in the air, tossed around by those who think marriage is the only prize worth chasing. Yet for all the pressure, there's a peculiar freedom. Spinsters might not have a household of their own, but they escape the tyranny of a drunken husband, or the drudgery of endless childbearing. Some amass property, especially if they inherit from family, and wield real economic power. Others become famous for their independence. There's an oft-repeated story of one Miss Eliza, who outlived 3 betrothals and ran her own bakery, her bread the envy of married and unmarried alike. Historians still argue whether spinsterhood was a curse or, secretly, a coveted status for the clever and resourceful. Then there are the widows, women who have survived husbands lost to fever, accident, or war. Widowhood is both a badge of sorrow and a new beginning. The law allows widows certain rights to keep a portion of the estate, to run a business, even to remarry if the spirit moves them. And it usually does, given the labour shortage.
A widow is sought after in her own right. She's proven, resilient, and, perhaps most importantly, she often brings property or valuable skills to a new match. Remarriage is a brisk business. You see it everywhere. A man's wife dies and within months, sometimes weeks, he's courting again, not out of coldness but of necessity.
Colonial life is relentless. Fields need ploughing, children need feeding, and nobody wants to face a New England winter alone. There's an old joke that widowers wait only as long as it takes for the morning bread to go stale before seeking a new partner. Widows too may remarry quickly, sometimes to younger men, a small but notable fringe in the courtship market. The occasional eyebrow raises, but mostly people nod in pragmatic understanding. Life for those on the second or third round of marriage is its own delicate dance. Blended families abound, with stepchildren, half-siblings, and all the attendant drama. You overhear neighbours debating whether Mr. Parsons' new wife should inherit his old wife's geese, or if the flock should go to the children. There's never a simple answer, and the arguments often last longer than the marriages themselves. Of course, not everyone finds another match. Some, like Abigail, decide enough is enough. You spot her now, sharing a laugh with a blacksmith, her eyes glinting with the satisfaction of a life lived on her own terms. Others continue to search, pinning hopes on new arrivals or distant relatives. Occasionally, a widow and a spinster join forces, sharing a household, pooling resources, and confounding gossips who can't quite categorize their relationship. One quirky tidbit: in certain villages, there's a custom of the widow's bench, a place by the meeting house door where eligible widows would gather after Sunday services, offering silent invitation to any brave suitor willing to try his luck. The more entrepreneurial widows even brought samples of their baking to sweeten the deal. Scholars still debate how these non-traditional families were viewed. Some argue that practical need overrode social prejudice, while others insist the stigma lingered. Yet, the record books are full of families built on second chances, patchwork lineages that would make any genealogist sweat. For every story of heartbreak, there are tales of hard-won happiness. A spinster opens a school, a widow becomes a midwife, a blended family carves out a place at the village table. The road may not be smooth, but it's undeniably real, and sometimes unexpectedly joyful. So as you make your way home, you realize that in colonial America, marriage is rarely the tidy ending found in fairy tales. It's more like an ongoing negotiation, a living, shifting partnership shaped by luck, wit, and a healthy dose of stubbornness. Whether you marry once, twice, or not at all, the path is yours to walk. You tip your hat to Miss Abigail, who nods back, her smile sly, her independence hard-won and unapologetic. Your path takes you next to the home of your betrothed, where the whole household is abuzz with nervous anticipation. Today is not the wedding, but rather the delicate and often comical ritual of preparing the wedding attire. Forget about gleaming white dresses or matching tuxedos. Colonial wedding fashion is all about making do, borrowing, and sometimes wearing the most unexpected colours. If you ever wondered what it's like to get married in your Sunday best, when your best is also your only, you're about to find out. You step into the bedroom, which is little more than a curtain-draped alcove. Laid out on the bed is a black woolen dress. Yes, black, not white. In colonial America, white dresses are as rare as indoor plumbing. Black is practical. It hides stains, can be worn to funerals and church, and stands up to the rigours of daily life. The dress, freshly brushed and maybe a little short at the ankles, has likely been worn by every woman in the family for generations. Your future spouse is already fussing with a borrowed coat, one size too big, sleeves threatening to swallow the hands whole. If you're lucky or wealthy, there might be new shoes, but more likely you're wearing boots with an extra patch stitched on for the occasion. The main rule: look presentable enough that no one starts a rumour about your family's declining fortunes. You catch a glimpse of your reflection in a small wavy mirror and try to look hopeful, despite the fact that you resemble someone preparing for a particularly sombre harvest festival. The entire family pitches in. Your soon-to-be mother-in-law inspects the stitching, plucks her tongue, and reinforces a hem with thread spun from last winter's wool. The younger sibling darts in and out of the room, occasionally trying on your hat, or attempting to help by sitting on the best pair of gloves. Your own family sends over a brooch or ribbon, sometimes the only bit of finery in the whole outfit. You pin it to your dress or lapel, a silent signal that, at least today, you are the centre of attention. Mainstream historians note that colonial wedding attire was less about fashion and more about practicality. The goal was to wear your sturdiest, most respectable clothing, not to dazzle anyone with elegance. Borrowing garments was common, especially for men, who might share coats, hats, or even shoes with friends and relatives. Sometimes a new bride or groom wore a family heirloom, a lace collar from England, a beaded pouch from a Dutch ancestor, or a homespun shawl dyed with local plants. And yet, amid all this frugality, there's a quirky side to colonial wedding fashion. In certain villages, it's customary for the bride to wear a garish red petticoat beneath her sober black dress, a secret pop of colour and rebellion. Some grooms would add a sprig of wild rosemary to their hatbands, for luck, or carry a lucky button in their pockets, a tradition imported from across the Atlantic, where the luck was apparently in short supply. Then there are the creative solutions to missing accessories. No shoes? Wrap your feet in clean linen and hope for dry weather. No gloves? Borrow a pair from the neighbour, even if they're 2 sizes too small. One legendary tale tells of a groom who, having lost his only hat to a runaway pig the night before, tied a kerchief around his head and faced the ceremony with the kind of dignity only desperation can muster.
Historians still debate how much these practical approaches affected the emotional weight of the ceremony. Did wearing borrowed clothes make the day feel less special? Or did it add a sense of shared community? Everyone investing a little in the new union. Some say it built solidarity. Others suspect it made for the world's most awkward family photos. If only they'd had cameras.
Despite the occasional laugh, these rituals bind families together. Each borrowed item carries a story: who wore it before, who patched it up, who danced in it last. Your mother reminds you that her wedding dress was originally her cousin's, and before that, her grandmother's. The local minister, never one to pass up a joke, claims he's married half the town in the same 3 coats. At last, after hours of pinning, stitching, and restitching, you're ready. The outfit is imperfect but heartfelt, a patchwork of past and present, a promise of future thrift. You stand in the crowded room, accepting compliments that are half genuine, half thinly veiled advice. You're ready, or as ready as anyone ever is. The day before the wedding, you take one last look at yourself, patched, pinned, and proud. There's comfort in the tradition, even the quirks. You belong to a long line of practical romantics, united not by silk or satin, but by shared stories, laughter, and just a hint of rosemary. As dawn creeps through the cracks in the shutters, the household stirs with a nervous energy that smells faintly of yeast and roasted onions. Today is the wedding feast, and you quickly discover that colonial celebrations are less about opulent banquets and more about creative resourcefulness. In the cramped kitchen, pots bubble and smoke drifts toward the rafters. This is not a grand affair with white tablecloths and dancing chandeliers here. The menu is dictated by whatever survived the last frost, whatever the neighbours could spare,
and whatever the family goat hasn't eaten yet. The central attraction is the wedding cake, but temper your expectations, there is no fluffy frosted masterpiece in sight.
Colonial wedding cakes are dense, hearty affairs, usually more bread than dessert. Picture a hefty slab of spiced fruit cake, sweetened with a careful ration of molasses or honey studded with nuts, dried apples, and maybe a few currants if someone's feeling generous. The outer crust is tough enough to withstand a wagon journey and just chewy enough to test the mettle of anyone with false teeth. You join the bride and groom as they move down a line of mismatched tables, greeting guests who've gathered from neighbouring farms, distant hamlets, and sometimes even from over the next ridge. There's laughter, clapping, and a flurry of well wishes, but the real star is the food, such as it is. Bowls of hearty stew make the rounds, each spoonful a gamble. Is that venison, or just a particularly gamey squirrel? Bread is torn, not sliced, and slathered with butter churned the night before. Everyone pretends not to notice the slightly smoky taste. Blame the youngest child who got too close to the oven. Mainstream historians agree that colonial wedding feasts were community affairs, shaped by the season and the local bounty. Guests often contributed to the meal, bringing their own dishes, pickled beans, smoked fish, maybe a pie that's half burnt, but full of pride. It's a potluck before the word existed, a test of hospitality and culinary improvisation. You don't get to be picky, you get to be grateful, and you get to be full. The cake, when it finally arrives, is paraded around the room with mock solemnity. Children reach for crumbs. Elders make pointed jokes about how many years this one will keep. And there's always that one relative who insists on sneaking a piece into their pocket for later. Perhaps for good luck, perhaps because it's safer there than on the plate. Superstition holds that if an unmarried guest sleeps with a piece of wedding cake under their pillow, they'll dream of their future spouse. Historians still argue whether this ever worked, or if it was simply an excuse to smuggle extra dessert out of the house. Quirky traditions abound. In some corners of the colonies, guests toss grains of wheat over the couple, meant to ensure fertility and prosperity, or maybe just to make a mess for the chickens to clean up afterward. In Dutch communities, it's customary to serve Early Colonial, the ancestor of the modern donut, while in French Huguenot settlements there might be almond tarts laced with just enough brandy to encourage a daring toast. One legendary tale tells of a feast where the main dish was a roasted raccoon, presented with a bow on its tail and a note wishing many years of cunning and resourcefulness. The celebration is as much about endurance as enjoyment. There are games, sometimes raucous, sometimes so gentle they threaten to lull you back to sleep. Blindfolded sack races across the muddy yard, impromptu fiddle contests, and the infamous who can carry the heaviest sack of flour challenge. It's a blend of honest labour and half-hearted revelry. Sometimes even the goats are recruited for entertainment, tied with ribbons and made to judge a pie contest with impressive seriousness. Food is shared, jokes are exchanged, and by the end of the feast, the boundary between family and guest blurs. You find yourself talking to a stranger about the merits of cider versus ale, or helping an elderly neighbour to a seat near the fire. It's loud, a little chaotic, and deeply comforting in its disorder. You notice that, in all the bustle, someone has slipped a small lopsided piece of cake into your coat pocket. Consider it an unofficial badge of honour. As the last pot is scraped and the youngest children nod off on benches, you realise the feast is not just a meal, it's a living promise of community, a chaotic but heartfelt welcome into the tangled web of colonial kinship. Even if the bread is burnt and the cake is tough, you belong, and tonight that is the sweetest part of all. The evening hush settles over the house, but your ordeal is far from finished. In a ritual unique to the time and place, you now face the peculiar, and let's be honest, deeply mortifying communal wedding night customs of colonial America. This is no gentle fade to black. Instead, your private moment is transformed into a public event, with half the town eager to play their part in ushering you into matrimonial bliss, or at the very least, mutual embarrassment. You retreat to your chamber, hoping for a moment of peace, but footsteps and muffled laughter betray the presence of well-meaning relatives lurking just outside.
In some communities, the newlyweds are subjected to the bedding ceremony. Here's how it works. Family and friends crowd the hallway, jostling for the best vantage point.
At a signal, often the minister's blessing or a cheeky rhyme recited by a younger sibling, the crowd erupts, following the couple into the bedroom with the reverence of a parade and the subtlety of a barnyard stampede. You are led to the bed, cheeks burning, as your mother-in-law fluffs the pillows and your best friend winks with exaggerated encouragement. There is laughter, sometimes a poorly tuned fiddle, and always a few bawdy jokes whispered by uncles, who clearly relish this annual opportunity. Someone throws a handful of grain over the quilt for luck. If you're especially unlucky, a toddler might leap onto the mattress at the last second, only to be whisked away to squeals of mock scandal. This, believe it or not, is a mainstream historical fact. The bedding ceremony, or putting to bed, was practiced across much of early colonial America, carried over from English, Scottish, and Dutch traditions. The stated purpose was to witness the legitimacy of the marriage. No shenanigans, no doubts about future offspring. Practically, it was as much about laughter and spectacle as about enforcing custom. Historians still argue whether these rituals were strictly adhered to, or if couples sometimes bribed their friends to make it quick and get out, so they could have a few precious moments of privacy. There are, of course, variations and fringe details. In some communities, the ceremony is more symbolic. Maybe a handful of neighbours pop in with a cup of cider, mutter a few blessings, and retreat. In others, the process drags on with elaborate games and songs designed to draw out the awkwardness. One New England legend tells of a group of pranksters who filled a couple's bed with dried peas, resulting in a restless night and a running joke that lasted for years. Another favourite is the chevrie or charivari, a raucous serenade of pots and pans, cowbells and noisy neighbours parading around the house. The goal is to embarrass, certainly, but also to initiate the couple into the wild unpredictability of married life. You, the blushing newlywed, endure it all with stoic grace, or at least you try. Your partner squeezes your hand under the blanket, both of you suppressing giggles and praying for a quick exit. The final act is a ritual toast. Mugs of cider or ale clink together as someone makes a joke about fruitful unions or many healthy calves. The last guest finally files out, and the door closes, leaving you in a blissful, if still slightly mortified silence. But you're not quite safe. Outside, the village boys are likely preparing another surprise. The charivari could start up at any moment, a cacophony meant to keep you awake and on your toes. You might even find your front door tied shut, or a bucket of water perched atop the frame. The community, it seems, is determined to make sure you never forget this night. Historians debate the true origins and intentions behind these customs. Were they meant to protect young couples, ensure social stability, or simply provide a rare excuse for mischief and camaraderie? Did the public spectacle ease the anxiety of the new union, or add layers of anxiety that lasted a lifetime? You may never know, but as the laughter fades and sleep finally tugs at your eyelids, you're grateful for the peculiar solidarity of it all.
And so, your wedding night in colonial America draws to a close, not in isolation, but enveloped by the relentless, often ridiculous affection of your entire village. If you manage to sleep through the racket, you'll wake up with a new spouse, a new story, and a slightly less private sense of what happily ever after really means.
Morning arrives with the sound of church bells and a faint whiff of embarrassment still clinging to your pillow. You made it through the public spectacle of the wedding night, but as the sun peaks over the fields and the gossip begins its slow circuit around the town, a new kind of tension settles in. Marriage in colonial America is not always till death do us part. Sometimes, as you quickly realize, things go spectacularly sideways.
Welcome to the shadowy world of annulments and colonial scandals, where slipping out of a bad match is as complicated as getting into one.
You trudge down the lane passing neighbours who can't resist a knowing smile or a barely veiled question about how the night went. In this world, privacy is a rare luxury and secrets are an endangered species. If your marriage has already started to wobble, maybe your spouse snores loud enough to wake the cows, or maybe you discover a hidden fondness for gambling debts. News travels fast. The more spectacular the failure, the faster it spreads. Annulments are rare, but they do happen. You find yourself sitting in a cramped, stuffy room, sometimes a parlour, sometimes a makeshift courtroom, where the minister or a magistrate listens to your tale of woe. Mainstream historians confirm that annulments in colonial America were permitted, but only under strict circumstances: fraud, impotence, bigamy, or being forced into marriage under duress. Proving any of these is another matter entirely. You might need a parade of witnesses, a doctor with questionable credentials, or a stack of letters written in increasingly dramatic handwriting. Scandal can erupt over the simplest things. There's the famous case of the tailor's wife, who vanished one spring, only to be discovered months later living in the next colony with a shoemaker. Or the story of the schoolmaster who married two sisters in two different towns, never realizing they were cousins until a travelling merchant spilled the beans at a market. Historians still argue whether these tales are true, exaggerated or entirely invented by neighbours with too much time on their hands and not enough chores. Fringe tidbits surface everywhere. In some coastal villages, the local magistrate was so swamped with annulment requests that he kept a special scandal ledger, a secret book listing every juicy detail for his own amusement.
There are whispers of a couple who, unable to stand each other after one particularly disastrous harvest, staged a fake haunting to convince the minister their marriage was cursed and should be dissolved.
Did it work? No one can quite remember, but the story lingers like a stubborn fog. Of course, not every unhappy couple gets an annulment. More often, people simply live with their choices, comforted by the knowledge that everyone else is struggling too. Still, the threat of scandal is never far away. A poorly timed comment, a suspicious glance at the tavern, or a spat at the market can ignite weeks of whispered speculation. Your own marriage might be solid, or it might already show signs of trouble. Either way, you keep a careful watch on your words and actions, knowing that the price of failure is high. If you're clever, you steer clear of the more colourful characters, the neighbour who accidentally lets slip other people's secrets, or the distant cousin with an eye for dramatic storytelling. There's a grim kind of camaraderie in all this. You and your fellow colonists are united by the constant balancing act between duty, reputation, and the unpredictable weather of the heart. Some find solace in the knowledge that even the most notorious scandals eventually fade, replaced by fresher gossip, or sometimes by actual forgiveness. As you walk home, you pass the village green, where children play at court, accusing each other of outlandish crimes and staging mock trials. Their laughter rings out, a gentle reminder that today's scandal is tomorrow's bedtime story. If you're lucky, you'll stay out of the scandal ledger, or at least have your side of the tale told with a bit of humour. So you tighten your grip on your new reality, knowing that, in colonial America, the path out of a bad match is thorny, and sometimes the best you can hope for is to survive the season with your dignity and sense of humour intact. After all, love might be fleeting, but a good story, especially one involving runaway brides, twin grooms, and the odd haunted barn, can last for generations. A few weeks into your new life, you find yourself at the kitchen table, quill in hand, staring at a family Bible the size of a small suitcase. The wedding is over, the gossip has mostly faded, and your greatest challenge now is figuring out how to record your marriage so no one ever questions it. In colonial America, keeping track of who married whom is almost an art form, a blend of paperwork, oral tradition, and whatever the local parson remembered after a pint or two. Mainstream historians agree that official records in colonial times were a chaotic patchwork. The most reliable document in your house might be the family Bible, its margins crammed with looping names, hasty dates, and the occasional ink blot from a nervous hand. The Bible isn't just a holy book. It's the closest thing you have to an identity card, a passport, and a marriage license rolled into one. The ritual of inscribing your wedding date, your spouse's full name, and maybe even a little flourish for good measure, is a point of pride and a not-so-subtle reminder to future generations that, yes, you were here and you did things by the book. It's not just Bibles, though. Some communities keep loose records in the back of church ledgers, or the minister's own handwritten notebook if you can read his scroll, which is debatable. The law says you should register your marriage with the local authorities, but what actually happens is as varied as the colonies themselves. Some towns are diligent, with a clerk who can recite every wedding for the last decade. Others, less so. In these places, family memory, rumour, and a neighbour's say-so carry more weight than any signature. A quirky fringe tradition exists in certain Dutch and German communities, where decorative marriage certificates, colourful, calligraphed, and splattered with bright ink, are displayed on the wall for all to see. Not only does this serve as proof, but it's also a conversation starter. Guests marvel at the artistry, ask about the origins, and sometimes spot a familiar name tucked in among the flowery borders. If you can't afford fancy paper, a bit of birch bark or even the back of a receipt will do in a pinch. Necessity breeds creativity. Still, the act of recording isn't just about vanity or even legality. Historians still argue whether these written records truly kept families honest, or if they mostly soothed anxious grandmothers, worried about the legitimacy of future grandchildren. The truth is, colonial life is unpredictable. Fires sweep through towns, floods wash away homes, and papers, no matter how carefully stored, are lost to time, mice, and the occasional toddler's grubby hands. You take the task seriously, feeling the weight of all those names before yours. Each entry tells a story. The year of a big blizzard, when 3 couples married in the same week, just to spite the cold. The time the parson's ink froze mid-vow, and the rest was recorded later by memory and the mercy of God. Some lines are crossed out, names half erased, the result of an annulment or a hurried remarriage.
A faded note in the margin reads, "Married by proxy, witnessed by all, and believed by some." A sly nod to the community's ongoing debates. There's a comfort in this ritual, as imperfect as it is.
You imagine your great-grandchildren flipping through these pages by candlelight, tracing your name with a curious finger, and wondering what kind of person you were. You add a little embellishment, a flourish under your spouse's name, a small drawing of a rooster for luck, a cryptic inside joke no one but the two of you will ever understand. At times the recording of marriages and births and deaths becomes a social event. The minister visits, tea is served, and the best pen is brought out for the occasion. Children gather to watch the official moment, vying for a spot close enough to see their name written into history. Even the family dog sometimes gets a mention, a testament to just how all-encompassing these ledgers can become. But for every careful entry, there are stories of mistakes, names spelled wrong, dates swapped, or entire marriages forgotten, until someone needs to prove inheritance rights. Family disputes occasionally flare up, with siblings arguing over which marriage counts, and whether Aunt Betsy was ever legally married to that mysterious traveller from Boston. In a society where oral tradition and written record overlap, Truth can be a slippery thing. You close the Bible and tuck it back into its place of honor, the ink still drying on your newest memory. For all its quirks and flaws, this act anchors you to the sprawling tapestry of colonial life, a little less fragile, a little more real. If tomorrow brings questions, disputes, or even scandal, you have your name in black and white. For now, that's enough. Not long after recording your union in the family Bible, you come face to face with another reality of colonial marriage. The law's long shadow. You may think your partnership is safe now, but in early America, legal restrictions are woven into the very fabric of matrimony. Who you can marry and who you absolutely cannot isn't always up to you or your family. Sometimes it's the work of lawmakers who never met you and frankly probably wouldn't like your cousin's bread pudding. As you haul firewood through the village square, you overhear neighbors talking, sometimes in hushed tones, sometimes with open frustration, about a couple whose wedding the law refused to recognize. It's not so rare. Colonial marriage law is a patchwork quilt stitched together from English common law, Dutch ordinances, Puritan codes, and whatever local officials decide on market day. What's allowed in one settlement might be strictly forbidden in the next. Mainstream historical fact: laws governing marriage in colonial America cover everything from minimum age requirements to bans on marrying outside your faith, social class, or most strictly race. In New England, Puritan leaders enforced strict codes prohibiting marriages between English settlers and indigenous people, or enslaved Africans, fearing the confusion of blood and the loss of religious or social control. In Virginia and the southern colonies, these bans become law. Anti-miscegenation statutes appear as early as the 1660s, making it a crime, sometimes even a felony, to wed across the color line. The rules don't stop there. In some colonies, marrying your deceased spouse's sibling is a scandalous grey area. Some ministers allow it, others threaten excommunication. There are also complex cousin loopholes in certain Dutch or German communities. First cousins may marry with permission, while elsewhere the idea provokes outright horror and frantic. Historians still argue whether these bans reflect deep-rooted social anxieties, or if, as some claim, they're just tools for property control, keeping land and inheritance neatly contained. Of course, there's always around the rules for the determined or the desperate. Some couples elope to more tolerant towns, their journey the stuff of whispered legend. Two lovers slipping away at dawn, borrowing a neighbour's wagon, and returning a week later with a marriage certificate and sheepish grins. In other cases, a sympathetic minister might accidentally overlook a detail, performing the ceremony quietly, then slipping away before anyone can complain. Quirky tidbits abound. In Maryland, one infamous judge becomes known for his unpredictable rulings, sometimes granting marriage licenses to couples everyone else considers mismatched, other times denying obvious pairs for reasons only he seems to understand. One story tells of a couple forced to live on opposite sides of a county line because only one side recognized their marriage. On weekends they'd meet on the boundary to share supper, waving to nosy neighbors who couldn't decide whether to pity them or be jealous of all that personal space. For some, the law is a shield, a means of protecting family honor, ensuring that inheritances stay in the right hands, or upholding religious beliefs. For others, it's a wall that must be climbed, skirted, or broken through. The tension between custom and law fuels endless debates at church, in the tavern, at every fireside where old grievances simmer. Even the local minister occasionally throws up his hands, declaring, "If love were so easily managed, we'd all sleep better." You hear whispers of couples forced apart, of families torn by the question of right and wrong. Some neighbors quietly support the rebels. Others clutch their Bibles and sigh over the decline of standards. Your own marriage may fall safely within the lines, or maybe you're forever one family squabble, or surprise cousin away from public outrage, the law in colonial America is less a fixed fence than a shifting, rattling gate.
Sometimes it swings open for the bold. Sometimes it slams shut, no matter how hard you plead. You learn to tread carefully, to keep an ear out for new edicts, and to be grateful if your union escapes legal scrutiny altogether.
As you stack your firewood and glance over at the meeting house, you realize that in this new world, love and law are uneasy bedfellows. The rules change, but the longing for connection and the inventiveness of those determined to find it remains constant. You give your spouse's hand a reassuring squeeze, both of you grateful that, at least for now, the law is on your side. You've settled into the rhythm of married life, but soon another, more complicated story drifts through the village. A marriage that crosses not just fences, but cultures. In colonial America, cross-cultural marriages aren't just rare, they're often fraught with challenge, suspicion, and curiosity from every corner of the settlement. But every so often, necessity, alliance, or a stubborn heart brings two people from different worlds together. Imagine yourself at the edge of the forest, the sun filtering through the trees, when you meet someone whose language, clothing, and customs differ from yours in almost every way. Maybe it's an English settler and a member of a local Wampanoag tribe, or a German newcomer and a French Huguenot seeking refuge. For some, marriage becomes a bridge, a chance to forge alliances, secure trade, or simply defy expectations. For others, it's a scandal, whispered about at every gathering, dissected by ministers and gossiped about over pickling barrels. Mainstream historical fact. Cross-cultural marriages did happen, though they were seldom easy. Some colonial governments encouraged such unions, especially between fur traders and native women, hoping to cement alliances or stabilize fragile settlements. French and Dutch traders in particular often married indigenous women, weaving together kinship networks that helped families thrive in the fur trade's wild borderlands. Children of these unions sometimes grew up with two names, two languages, and the unique ability to move between worlds. Yet, these marriages were rarely accepted without suspicion. Historians still argue whether early colonists saw them as legitimate unions or as necessary evils, tolerated only when politics or survival demanded it. Laws in some colonies fluctuated wildly, one year permitting, the next forbidding, and always leaving families caught in the middle. Ministers might perform a hurried ceremony, then avoid the family for months to dodge community backlash. In Puritan New England, such unions were often outright banned, while in the Dutch Hudson Valley or the multicultural port of New Amsterdam, they might draw only a raised eyebrow and a knowing nod. Fringe customs flourished on the margins. Some cross-cultural couples developed private rituals, a secret exchange of tokens, a meal prepared from both heritages, or a blended naming tradition for their children. There are stories of Dutch brides learning to tan hides, of English grooms trying and failing to master the intricacies of indigenous cooking, and of German settlers charmed into planting French gardens, only to discover their rose was actually a particularly stubborn weed. But the road is rarely smooth. Families sometimes refuse to recognize the marriage, withholding property or inheritance. Neighbors debate whether the children count for membership in the church or community. The couple themselves navigate a minefield of misunderstanding, different ways of marking time, contrasting ideas about gender roles, and wildly divergent approaches to parenting, faith, and celebration. And yet, sometimes these unions thrive outlasting the skepticism, blending traditions and forging new forms of family. One legendary tale tells of an English woman captured in a raid and later choosing to remain with her adopted native family, marrying a local Sachem and becoming an indispensable bridge between cultures. Another speaks of a fur trader whose children became leaders in both French and indigenous circles, able to negotiate peace or stir up trouble with equal skill. You spot a cross-cultural couple at the market, their children switching easily between languages as they haggle for corn and trade stories about distant relatives. Their home is a mosaic of customs, baskets hanging beside pewter plates, the scent of wild sage mingling with roasted apples, lullabies sung in overlapping melodies. Some days they face suspicion, or even outright hostility. Other days they're quietly admired for their resilience, ingenuity, and stubborn refusal to let anyone else define what family means. Historians still debate whether such marriages changed the course of colonial life or simply reflected the complexity of an ever-shifting frontier. You wonder what courage it takes to build a life on the border between worlds, to forge love and kinship where others see only boundaries. As evening falls, you walk past their house, the glow of two cultures blending behind handmade curtains. You think, not for the first time, but sometimes the bravest act in colonial America is simply choosing whom to call your own. As the seasons turn and the leaves crisp to gold, you begin to notice a quiet undercurrent in village life. A handful of couples disappear for a day, sometimes two, only to return with nervous smiles and the faint dust of distant roads on their boots. Elopement, escape, and secret vows are as old as romance itself, and in colonial America they are as much about desperation and resourcefulness as love. You hear the first whispers at the market. Someone's daughter has run off with the blacksmith's apprentice. A pair of cousins vanished at dusk and turned up married by dawn, the ink on the license still drying. Parents grumble and neighbors shake their heads. But everyone listens. Elopement stories are catnip for a community where privacy is rare and rebellion is usually stamped out before it can take root. Why elope? Sometimes it's about love that defies the elder's wisdom or a match disapproved by the local minister. Sometimes it's simply the thrill of defying authority, of snatching a little freedom from the ever-watchful eyes of family and church. For many, though, it's the only path left when the rules of courtship and marriage are just too suffocating or too expensive. Maybe your families couldn't agree on the price of a goat, or maybe the matchmakers just didn't like your style. Mainstream historical fact: elopements in colonial America were not just the stuff of legend, but an ever-present possibility. Some were as simple as a midnight dash to a neighbouring town, where a sympathetic parson was known to ask fewer questions. Others were more daring, a stolen boat across a river, a nighttime ride to the edge of the colony, or a covert ceremony in the back room of a friendly tavern. The law might catch up later, but for the moment, love wins, or at least escapes. The risk, of course, is scandal. If caught, you could face public penance, a steep fine, or worse, disownment by your family. In some communities, the church demanded weeks of repentance for couples who married outside proper channels. In others, the whole affair might be quietly forgiven after the arrival of a first grandchild, or the need for extra help at harvest. There are, of course, the memorable failures. One notorious tale speaks of a pair who tried to elope by canoe, only to tip over halfway across the lake. They were fished out by their would-be in-laws, wet and sheepish, and married by noon, if only to keep the peace. Another story features a runaway couple who, after much planning, discovered the local magistrate was their uncle, an awkward moment best handled with quick apologies and an extra pie for the family table. Elopement leaves a mark on the community. The rumour mill kicks into overdrive. Who helped? Who knew? Who should have stopped it? Neighbours debate whether to admire the boldness or sigh over the decline of good order. Historians still argue whether elopement truly signalled changing values, or whether it was simply a release valve for the pressure cooker of colonial conformity. One quirky fringe detail: in some villages it's believed that the path taken by an eloping couple becomes blessed. Future lovers follow the same road, hoping for a share of good luck, or at least the courage to face their own obstacles. There are even secret marks on fence posts or carvings in old trees, clues left by couples for those who come after. You cross paths with one such couple, their eyes still bright with mischief and relief. They tell their story in hushed tones, the details shifting with each retelling. Sometimes the constable was just behind them, sometimes the moon was full, casting silver shadows as they hurried through the woods. You smile, caught up in the thrill of it all. In a world where every move is watched and every love is tested, sometimes a leap into the unknown is the bravest and most memorable choice you can make. As the village settles down for the night, you find yourself glancing toward the edge of the woods, wondering who might slip away before dawn, whether for love, for freedom, or for the sheer joy of thumbing one's nose at authority. Secret vows and elopements remind everyone that sometimes the heart will not be ruled. After the thrills and whispers of secret vows, daily life in the colonies resumes its relentless pace. Marriage, you quickly realize, is far less about candlelit moments and much more about hard work, backbreaking, relentless, and rarely glamorous. In colonial America, marriage is not a love story spun by poets, but a survival pact written in calloused hands and shared burdens. You wake early, already listening for your partner's footsteps, and begin the endless rhythm of home life. Your morning starts with chores, fetching water from the well, feeding chickens, mending last year's shirts, or splitting logs for the hearth. There is comfort in the routine. Even as you learn your partner's quirks and silent signals, the quick sigh that means the goat got into the beans again, the small smile that rewards a well-swept floor. Mainstream historical fact. In the colonies, couples worked side by side to carve a living out of an unforgiving landscape. Survival, not sentiment, was the true glue of most marriages. Food must be grown, gathered, preserved. Storms and illness can wipe out a season's work, so both husband and wife must know how to plant, plough, chop, churn, sow and bake. Even children are pressed into service as soon as they can walk and carry a bucket. Everyone's labour counts. Those idyllic images of domestic bliss, they exist, but only after the fields are weeded and the bread is baked. Marriage as survival means expectations are practical, even unromantic. Your partner is chosen for their reliability, strength and skill, as much as if not more than their wit or good looks. You need someone who can stitch a wound or patch a roof, who knows when to harvest corn and how to keep raccoons out of the pantry. Historians still argue whether love blossomed in this soil of necessity, or if affection simply grew out of long days and shared hardship. Yet hardship breeds a peculiar intimacy. There's a camaraderie in washing clothes by the riverbank, in nursing each other through fevers, in planning the next season's planting by lamplight. Jokes become a lifeline. You tease your spouse for burning the porridge, and they remind you of the time you mistook a skunk for a stray cat. You find comfort in small routines, the way your partner turns down the bed, the exact place you keep the salt, the sound of laughter drifting out the open window. Of course, marriage as survival has its quirks. Some communities develop elaborate systems for sharing work between households. A bee is called spinning bee, quilting bee, barn raising, where neighbours gather to help each other, strengthening social bonds as well as muscles. One famous tidbit: during harsh winters, families would pile into a single room for warmth. Everyone sleeping close, sometimes with livestock tucked in nearby. Privacy is a rare luxury. You learn to communicate with a glance or a well-placed elbow. The struggle for survival blurs the lines between romance, partnership, and necessity. Sometimes spouses find themselves taking on unexpected roles. A husband injured by a falling tree might learn to spin wool while his wife runs the plough. A wife recovering from childbirth relies on her husband to nurse the baby, and mind the half. Flexibility is not just admired, it's required. You marvel at your partner's strength, their inventiveness, their stubborn refusal to let adversity win. Still, beneath all the sweat and soil, moments of genuine tenderness emerge. You share an apple by the fire, exchange stories from your childhood, or pause to admire the evening sky together. Sometimes, laughter is the only thing that stands between you and despair. Colonial couples develop a gallows humour, cracking jokes about the neighbour's eternally broken fence, or the minister's never-ending sermons. It's survival, yes, but it's also a kind of love story, a slow, steady warmth that endures long after the excitement fades. Historians debate the true nature of colonial marriage. Was it a matter of grit and necessity, or did true affection bloom beneath the hard exterior? You decide it's probably both, a partnership of equals forged in fire and mended with laughter. As the sun sets, you sit side by side on the stoop, feet aching, hearts tired but content. You watch the fireflies flicker in the growing dark, grateful for another day survived together. In the silence you realize that in colonial America, marriage isn't just about surviving, it's about finding someone who will weather every storm at your side, with a sturdy roof, a warm fire, and just enough jokes to make the struggle worthwhile.
One chilly autumn morning, you hear a knock on the door, an old neighbour, breathless and eager for a cup of cider and a bit of gossip.
Word has gotten out, a girl down the lane is marrying soon, and the whole village is abuzz. But as you sip your drink and listen to the chatter, it becomes clear that not everyone agrees on what old enough means. In colonial America, the age at which someone could marry is a subject of constant debate and sometimes uncomfortable reality. You watch the young bride-to-be in question, barely taller than the churn, hands still soft from childhood, eyes wide as she listens to her elders bargain over dowries and chickens. This scene isn't rare. In the colonies, life is uncertain, and families often arrange marriages for daughters, and sometimes sons, at ages that, by modern standards, seem shockingly young. Mainstream historical fact, legal minimums vary by colony, but it was not unusual for girls to wed in their early teens, and boys only a few years older. The logic was brutally practical: more hands to work the farm, more years to bear children, and the hope that starting early might help families endure whatever calamity the next season brings. Neighbours grumble that if she can carry a bucket and keep the hearth, she's old enough. Others argue, often in hushed tones, that the practice is unfair or even cruel, especially when it comes to the emotional toll. Historians still argue whether these early marriages were as commonplace as the records suggest, or if a handful of dramatic cases shaped popular imagination. Laws existed, but enforcement was spotty, and exceptions seemed to sprout up as quickly as spring weeds. Of course, age is not always the deciding factor. Sometimes it's about strength. Can the boy plough a field? Can the girl spin and bake? A fringe tradition emerges in some communities, the bucket test, where a potential bride is asked to carry a full pail of water from the well to prove her readiness for marriage. More than one love-struck suitor has been caught slyly removing a few stones from the bucket to help his intended pass. Not all child brides are pushed into marriage unwillingly. Some relish the idea of their own hearth and home, of escaping a crowded household, or simply of dressing up for a day. Others face the pressure of family need, or the not-so-subtle warnings that there may not be better options next year. Boys, too, are swept along, expected to work, provide, and become men while still learning to shave without nicking their chins. One story echoes through the village. A girl named Susanna, married at 13, outlived 3 husbands, ran a thriving farm, and became the best midwife in 2 counties. People debate whether her life was admirable, tragic, or simply typical, a testament to how blurred the lines between childhood and adulthood could be. Another tale tells of a couple who lied about their ages to marry, only for their secret to unravel at the baptism of their first child. prompting a storm of lectures and I told you so's from every elder in town. The debate continues at every table and every quilting bee. Is it better to marry early and face life's storms together? Or should children be allowed a few more years of innocence before taking up the burdens of adulthood? There are no easy answers, just stories layered upon stories, and the knowledge that life in the colonies rarely allows for perfect solutions. Some argue that early marriage provides security, especially in a world where disease, famine, or accident can leave a family short-handed in a heartbeat. Others push for change, slightly higher ages, more safe for the young, a little more room for childhood. Every family, it seems, strikes its own uneasy balance. You watch the young bride-to-be for a moment longer, her face a mix of hope and anxiety, and wonder what path her life will take.
You know that, for all its hardships, colonial marriage is a journey, sometimes started before a person is ready, sometimes shaping them into someone stronger than they ever imagined.
The village will watch, comment, and debate, but in the end, it's the couple themselves who must grow into their roles. As the leaves fall and the air turns cold, you stoke the fire, pour another cup of cider, and hope that time, luck, and maybe a little kindness will be on their side. There's a new chill in the air, and you notice it's not just the coming of winter. There's a heaviness in the village that comes from whispered questions, tense glances, and the distant sound of a couple's argument, echoing through thin wooden walls. Someone you know is trying to end their marriage. In colonial America, divorce is so rare it's almost a legend, yet the mere possibility is enough to rattle everyone's nerves. You cross the muddy road to the home of a neighbour, drawn by the scent of baking bread and the hope of news. Sure enough, the conversation is already turning. He's petitioned a court, someone says, lowering their voice and glancing at the window. You listen closely because a divorce is not just a private affair but a public drama, subject to scrutiny, pity, and endless retelling. Mainstream historical fact: colonial divorce laws are strict and inconsistent. In most colonies, divorce is nearly impossible. New England, with its Puritan roots, is the rare exception. Here, under certain circumstances, adultery, abandonment, bigamy, or failure to perform marital duties, a couple might secure a legal separation. Even then, it's a long, grueling process. Most other colonies recognize only annulment or private separation, forcing unhappy spouses to remain legally bound in all but name. Historians still argue whether the few divorces that occurred signaled a shift toward modern values, or if they were simply anomalies, tolerated only when no other option remained. You can almost hear the wheels turning in people's minds. If the tailor's wife could be granted freedom, what about the blacksmith's daughter or the miller's son? What line must be crossed? What story told to satisfy the judge, or more daunting still, the congregation? Divorce proceedings often play out in public, with witnesses called and dirty laundry aired for all to hear. Sometimes it's petty. Who owns the dog? Who gets the best castle? Other times, it's heartbreakingly real. Tales of cruelty, violence, or a simple, insurmountable gulf between two people who started as partners and grew into strangers. One fringe tidbit floats around. In some towns, couples desperate to split would trade spouses in a makeshift, unofficial ceremony, swapping partners at a public market and declaring new unions in front of bemused onlookers. Though rare and strictly illegal, such events became the stuff of local legend, retold with a mix of scandal and admiration for the audacity involved. Most often, though, unhappy couples simply make do. They split their lives as best they can. Separate bedrooms, parallel routines, icy silences broken only by the necessities of survival. Occasionally, a partner disappears to a distant town, never to be seen again, an unspoken agreement that life will go on, just not together. But for those who brave the legal route, the process is draining. You must gather evidence,
convince authorities, and sometimes endure the humiliation of public penance before you're finally free.
You watch as the couple at the heart of the current drama pass each other in the lane, eyes averted, faces set. The village can't help but watch, everyone secretly relieved. It's not their turn under the microscope.
The minister preaches patience and forgiveness. The judge, if he's feeling generous, may offer a stern warning and a final chance for reconciliation before granting a decree.
For children caught in the middle, the confusion is palpable. Who do they live with? Who explains the sudden absence at the dinner table? Neighbours debate endlessly. Is divorce the mark of a failing society, or a small act of courage in a world where endurance is prized above all else? Historians still puzzle over these rare divorces.
Were they signs of growing individual rights, or just proof that even the strictest rules can bend under enough pressure? The answer is as murky as the autumn fog that rolls in from the fields.
As the sun sets, you hear a door slam, followed by the hesitant notes of a lullaby from the house next door. Life continues, fractured but moving forward, as it always does in the colonies. You close your shutters against the cold, grateful for your own fragile peace, and wonder how many stories, whispered or shouted, are hidden behind the tidy facades of the village. For now, divorce remains the exception, not the rule, a desperate gamble in a world that expects you to endure. But sometimes that gamble pays off, and two people find a measure of freedom, even if the price is public discomfort and a place in local legend. Time weaves onward, and as you trudge past the crooked fences and smoke-laced rooftops, you notice that few families look quite like the portraits your grandmother described. Remarriage and blended families have become their own living tradition in colonial America, a patchwork quilt stitched from grief, necessity, and the odd stroke of luck. In a world where life is fragile and unpredictable, the end of one marriage is often just the beginning of another. It starts more often than not with loss. A fever sweeps through in spring, a fall from a ladder, a raid, or simply the slow, inevitable fading of a loved one in winter's chill. Grief sits heavy on the home, but the fields wait for no one, and mouths still need feeding. Within weeks, sometimes days, a new courtship blooms, less out of romance than the unrelenting math of survival. Two households, battered but still standing, merge to form a single unit with just enough strength to see another season. Mainstream historical fact, remarriage is remarkably common in the colonies, particularly among widows and widowers with children, where modern romance is often slow and tentative. Colonial courtship after loss is brisk, pragmatic, and rarely sentimental. A man may lose his wife and find a new bride before the fields turn green again. A widow, left with children and livestock, might remarry at the urging of neighbours, the church, or even her own children. Blended families, where stepchildren, half-siblings, and new spouses share cramped quarters, are less the exception than the rule. At first the adjustments are awkward. A new wife teaches her stepchildren to spin, bake, or mind the geese. A new husband tries to win over wary eyes by fixing fences or mending shoes. Sometimes the transition is smooth, and laughter returns quickly to the hearth. Other times it's a slow, uneven thaw, small resentments, whispered prayers for patience, and the quiet fear that this new arrangement won't take root. There are plenty of quirky details to soften the strain. One tradition in certain towns is the welcome supper, where the whole community brings food to help the newly blended family settle in. Pies, smoked fish, extra quilts, and inevitably, stories about who burned the bread or lost the cow last year. Another tidbit, children sometimes form fast alliances across new step-sibling lines, sharing jokes and secrets, or banding together in protest when chores are handed out by the newcomer. Occasionally, a step-parent or half-sibling earns a nickname that sticks for generations, Old Goose, Patch, or Candle, depending on their quirks and skills. Historians still argue whether blended families faced more hardship or just a different kind. Some say these households were more resilient, buffered by diverse skills and personalities. Others insist the adjustment could be fraught, especially if property and inheritance were at stake. Tales abound of epic squabbles over a single prized cow, or of a mother dividing her favourite quilt among 7 squabbling children, none of whom remember who started the argument.
Religion and law shape the contours of remarriage. Some denominations are more welcoming than others, and the local minister often plays matchmaker, peacemaker, and judge. Inheritance laws can complicate things further, with property divided, contested, or when no agreement is reached, simply left to languish. More than one family has been torn apart by a badly written will or a missing marriage record. Yet for every tale of conflict there are stories of new beginnings. You meet a family at the market whose children joke and jostle as if they've always belonged together, their parents sharing a look that says, "We've survived worse." You hear of a widow who taught her new husband's children to read, or a widower whose youngest stepdaughter became his most trusted helper in the fields. Slowly, new traditions take root. A shared meal, a special tune sung at bedtime, or the simple act of carving each child's name into the doorframe as they grow. Historians debate the long-term effects of so much blending, but the lived reality is clear. Colonial families are messy, improvised, and constantly adapting. You realize as you watch your neighbors navigate their patched-together households that family in colonial America is not defined by blood alone. It's built on need, on habit, on the willingness to face each dawn, no matter how tangled the branches of the family tree may be. As dusk falls, you walk past homes where laughter, argument, and lullabies mingle, proof that, even here, life refuses to stand still.
Remarriage isn't just an end or a beginning. It's a thread that ties old sorrow to new hope, weaving yet another story into the ever-changing tapestry of the village.
Dawn breaks with a flurry of roosters and the sound of heated discussion spilling out from your neighbour's yard. Today's debate isn't about crops or sermons, but about something far more delicate. Who gets what after the last funeral, and what rights a widow really holds in this tangled colonial world. Inheritance and widows' rights are as much a part of marriage as vows and veils, and they bring out all the hidden dramas that families would rather keep swept under the rushes. You watch as a recently widowed woman stands in her doorway, arms folded, surveying her late husband's relatives as they bicker over everything from land to the last 3 spoons. Her eyes are wary, her back straight, and her expression says she's been through worse. In colonial America, her position is both precarious and powerful. By law, a widow is entitled to a dower share, usually 1/3 of her husband's property for the rest of her life. But in practice, the outcome depends as much on custom, negotiation and family clout as on dusty legal codes. Mainstream historical fact: in most colonies, a widow can remain in the marital home, keep some livestock, and harvest from the same fields she once worked with her husband. But she often needs the approval of male relatives or local officials, and every family handles things differently. In some regions, a widow is expected to remarry as soon as decently possible. In others, she fights for years to keep her home, especially if there are children involved.
Arguments flare up over everything imaginable. Spoons, wool blankets, the cow with a strange white patch, a rusty axe. Each item is claimed, measured, and sometimes quite literally pulled from 2 sides at once. One notorious tidbit: families have been known to stash prized objects in the thatch or bury silverware in the garden, hoping to retrieve it once the dust settles.
Historians still argue whether these inheritance squabbles were more about survival or stubborn pride. Sometimes, a savvy widow enlists allies, her own kin, a friendly neighbour, or the village minister. She may use the widow's third as leverage, promising or withholding access to certain fields or tools in exchange for support or silence. Some widows become expert negotiators, deftly outmaneuvering relatives who expect them to roll over. Others, less fortunate, are bullied into giving up their rights, forced to move in with a distant cousin or remarry someone with more ambition than affection. The law is rarely on one side alone. Ministers and local courts might step in if the dispute gets too rowdy, or if children are left unprovided. There's the famous tale of Widow Martin, who barricaded herself in her home for a week, tossing insults and the occasional chicken at anyone who dared cross her threshold. In the end, she kept the house and the chickens, but lost most of her spoons to a determined niece. Customs around inheritance reveal much about the village's character. Some families value fairness, dividing even the smallest item evenly among children. Others favour the eldest son, who inherits the bulk and promises, sometimes falsely, to look after everyone else. Stepchildren and blended families add layers of complexity, with arguments over which marriage counts for inheritance, or whether that stepdaughter is entitled to a single cow or just her mother's old shawl. The wider community rarely stays silent. Gossip becomes a form of currency. Stories of generosity or greed, of clever negotiation or humiliating defeat, are traded over fences and at church. Historians debate whether inheritance rules truly protected widows or merely shifted burdens from one set of shoulders to another. One peculiar tradition stands out. In some towns, a widow's claim is announced publicly, with neighbours gathering to witness her enter the barn or home and touch the items she's entitled to keep.
Woe betide anyone who tries to snatch something after that village memory is long, and grudges are longer still. As you watch the widow stand her ground, you see that her real inheritance may not be a cow or a patch of earth, but the knowledge that she can endure, bargain, and sometimes win.
In colonial America, every marriage ends with a reckoning, and every widow writes her own chapter, sometimes with a spoon, sometimes with a stubborn heart, always with a fierce determination not to be forgotten. The sun glints off the steeple as you walk toward the heart of the village, where the local parson's house stands tall and slightly askew. If marriage in colonial America is a drama, then the minister, or parson as he's called, plays a starring role. His power extends far beyond the pulpit. He's judge, counsellor, gatekeeper, and when the moment calls for it, comic relief. The fate of your union can hinge on his mood, his memory, and even his taste in pie. You find the parson in his study, surrounded by stacks of sermons, legal books, and half-finished letters. He's respected, but not feared, with a reputation for quoting scripture and gossiping with equal enthusiasm. Mainstream historical fact: colonial ministers wield significant authority over who marries whom, setting the tone for the entire community. No marriage proceeds without the parson's blessing, and his refusal can dash hopes, break hearts, or, on rare occasion, provoke a minor rebellion. You arrive, hat in hand, and wait while he debates whether your intended spouse's family is respectable enough or whether last Sunday's bans really counted, given the incident with the geese.
He quizzes you on your knowledge of the catechism, your church attendance, and your intentions. His questions veer from the deeply theological to the hilariously mundane. Do you plan to plant more beans this year? Are you skilled at mending sock? A positive answer to either can tip the scales.
For some, the parson is a source of reassurance. He knows the family histories, keeps secrets, most of them anyway, and offers gentle advice or stern warnings when needed. He's seen it all. Couples giddy with new love, widows remarrying with wary hope, scandalous elopements, and marriages by proxy that test the limits of his patience. He's officiated weddings in drawing rooms, barns, and once atop a haystack because the bride insisted on a better view. Quirky tidbits abound. Some parsons, have signature phrases or favorite psalms they repeat at every wedding, earning quiet groans or knowing smiles from the congregation. There's the tale of Reverend Pottle, famous for blessing marriages with a pinch of snuff and a warning about the perils of undercooked mutton. Another minister, notorious for his absent-mindedness, once performed a double wedding and swapped the rings, resulting in years of neighbourly jokes about whose finger was truly blessed. Yet with great power comes great responsibility, and occasionally controversy. Historians still argue whether ministers followed the law to the letter or relied more on personal discretion. Some turned a blind eye to cousin marriages. Others quietly performed unions for couples the town disapproved of. There's the legend of a parson who refused to marry anyone he suspected of laziness, forcing one bridegroom to chop firewood before earning his vows. If a marriage runs into trouble, the parson is often the first to hear about it. He counsels couples in crisis, mediates family disputes, and, in extreme cases, helps initiate an annulment or separation. His word carries weight, and his blessing is both a comfort and a shield, though it doesn't always prevent scandal or heartbreak. You leave his house with a sense of relief or dread, depending on how your meeting went. The parson's approval is the final hurdle before the wedding can go forward. His presence at the ceremony is a reminder that, in colonial America, marriage is not just a personal affair, but a communal one, overseen by the sharp eyes and steady hands of someone who has seen it all and then some. As the church bells toll and you step into the cool afternoon, you realize that, for all its challenges, colonial marriage is as much about community as it is about the couple. The parson stands at the center of that world, a link between tradition and hope, laughter and solemn promise, past and future. As your new life together unfolds, you quickly learn that colonial America's villages run on more than just hard work. They run on rumors, reputation, and a never-ending current of small-town gossip. It's not just your in-laws who keep tabs on your marriage. It's everyone from the baker's wife to the farmhand who claims he overheard something important while mucking out the stables. You're not just part of a family now, you're a character in the ever-expanding story of your community, with all eyes and ears upon you. Each day brings a new wave of commentary. Did you notice how much salt she put in the stew? Did you hear the way he laughed at the parson's joke? Every gesture, every conversation, every choice, no matter how small, finds its way into the village's collective memory. A sideways glance at the market or a missed Sunday service is enough to set tongues wagging. You quickly realize that the neighbor's chickens seem to know your business before you do. Mainstream historical fact: in colonial towns, gossip serves as both a form of entertainment and a powerful tool for enforcing social norms. The smallest slip can become the subject of heated debate. Everyone has an opinion about who should have married whom, how much cider is too much, and whether your choice of wedding attire was a stroke of genius or an act of desperation. The system of communal reputation is woven into every facet of daily life, and sometimes the threat of public opinion is enough to keep even the most rebellious spirits in line. You hear whispers at the well, snatches of speculation in the pews, and the unmistakable sound of children giggling as they imitate your morning routine. Some days, the gossip is light and harmless, jokes about mismatched socks or your penchant for humming while you milk the cow. Other times it's sharp and unforgiving, particularly when someone's marriage starts to falter or an inheritance dispute flares up. A favourite village pastime is the gossip walk, a meandering stroll down the main road, ostensibly to visit a neighbour, but in reality, to trade stories and see who's leaving whose house a little too late in the evening. There are fringe customs too. Some villages have a self-appointed news carrier, a person often elderly, always sharp-eared, who delights in passing along tidbits with just enough embellishment to make every story juicier. It's said that in one town, the news carrier wore a special hat on days when the gossip was especially good, prompting everyone to ask, well, what's the story today? Historians still argue whether gossip was more destructive, or simply the glue that held communities together. Was it a means of policing morality and maintaining standards, or was it just a way to pass long winter nights with a bit of mischief? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the middle. For every person who suffers from the sharp edge of rumour, another finds comfort in the knowledge that everyone's life is equally exposed. Of course, sometimes reputation is shaped less by what you do, and more by what people imagine you've done. Stories grow in the telling. Last week's innocent mishap becomes next month's cautionary tale. The way you handled a burnt loaf, a late payment, or a hasty remark might be retold for years, gathering layers of exaggeration along the way. You and your spouse develop a quiet code for dealing with the scrutiny, a squeeze of the hand here, a shared smirk there, and the occasional dramatic flourish, just to keep everyone guessing. Sometimes you feed the rumour mill with a well-placed joke, or respond to a particularly outrageous story with a laugh and a shrug. There's comfort in knowing that, as the subject of gossip, you've truly become part of the fabric of the village. Some nights you and your partner sit by the fire, recounting the day's rumours, and marvelling at the creativity of your neighbours. Did they really say you were seen riding a pig to market? Was it your goat who started that ruckus in the churchyard? The stories may sting at times, but mostly they're just another thread in the tapestry of community life, a reminder that in colonial America, no one is ever truly alone, for better or for worse. After months of hard work, awkward negotiations, and no small amount of gossip, the village is at last ready to celebrate with you. There's a rare sense of anticipation in the air, a whisper of excitement that even the most stoic elders can't quite hide. The time has come for the wedding celebration's final act, music, dancing, and communal revelry that stitches together the very heart of colonial life. You find yourself swept up in preparations, stringing garlands of dried apples and corn husks across the beams of the village hall. The fiddler tunes his instrument in the corner while the baker's youngest daughter rehearses her favourite song in a voice both earnest and slightly off-key. The celebration is simple but brimming with life, a patchwork of mismatched plates, borrowed chairs and lanterns casting gentle shadows across the floor. Mainstream historical fact. Wedding festivities in colonial America are boisterous affairs, marked by feasting, music and dances, handed down from Europe and adapted to New World realities. There's the Virginia reel, the money musk, and lively country jigs that invite every guest, no matter how tone-deaf or too left-footed, to join the fun. You don't have to be graceful, only willing. Laughter and muddled steps are as much a part of the tradition as the dances themselves. The evening begins with the gathering song, a call for all to leave their worries at the door. Then comes the parade of food, pies, stews, cider, roasted root vegetables, and for the daring, a jug of something stronger passed discreetly under the table. Children dart between tables, snatching bites of bread and inventing their own games beneath the grown-ups' feet. A favourite fringe custom is the broom dance, where the newlyweds must sweep a broom together in rhythm to the music, symbolising partnership and cooperation. There's always laughter as someone trips, or a broomstick goes flying, and the moment becomes the stuff of family legend. In Dutch settlements, you might witness a kissing bridge, a doorway where the bride and groom must exchange a quick peck before the crowd allows them through. Sometimes the youngest children sneak through first, giggling at the blushing grown-ups behind them. Songs echo late into the night, their lyrics a mix of old-world longing and new-world hope. Some are silly, meant to provoke laughter, others are bittersweet, recalling those left behind across the sea or lost to time and hardship. The fiddler may launch into a haunting air, and for a moment the hall is quiet, each guest remembering loved ones and blessings, both near and far. Historians still argue whether these celebrations were more about the couple or the community. Did they serve to bond families and neighbours, or to release months of pent-up tension and labour? Either way, the result is the same. People leave with tired feet, full bellies, and stories to last through the winter. Sometimes an impromptu dance spills out into the yard, and you find yourself under the stars, hand in hand, moving to the music of crickets and laughter. The evening ends with a circle dance, everyone holding hands and swaying together, voices rising in a song that drifts into the night. You look around and realize that in this moment you are woven into the fabric of village life, one story among many cherished and remembered. Later, as you help sweep the hall and collect stray ribbons, you smile at the memory of stumbling through your first dance, grateful for every misstep. The celebration lingers long after the last lantern is snuffed, a gentle reminder that in colonial America, marriage is never just between two people. It is a joining of households, histories, and hopes, played out to the rhythm of fiddles, laughter, and the steady beat of shared life. With the festivities behind you and the echoes of laughter still clinging to the rafters, you and your partner begin to carve out the subtle rituals of everyday life, what the colonists might call keeping house. As seasons pass and anniversaries begin to stack up, you discover that celebrating long-term love in early America is a quiet, sometimes quirky affair, woven into daily routines rather than marked by grand gestures or lavish gifts. Your first anniversary sneaks up almost unnoticed, wedged between a late frost and the planting of spring peas. There are no diamonds or bouquets. Instead, you trade a pair of woolen mittens, hand-stitched by candlelight, and a lopsided pie filled with last year's dried cherries.
The exchange is simple but deeply felt, a nod to the reality that, in this world, every small comfort is hard-won and precious.
Mainstream historical fact. Colonial couples rarely marked anniversaries with official celebrations, but personal rituals evolved nonetheless. Some carve their initials into the beams above the hearth. Others save a piece of wedding cake or what's left of it to share a year later.
A favourite tradition among certain German settlers is the blessing loaf, a new bread baked each year, symbolising hope for plenty and peace in the home. Most often, it's the quiet acts that count. A warm blanket, mended without complaint. A favourite story retold on a stormy night. You and your spouse grow attuned to each other's moods, when to offer a back rub after a long day, when to listen, and when to simply let silence settle, companionable and unhurried. Over time, you develop a private shorthand, a glance that means, let's go home, a tap on the shoulder that says all is forgiven, a particular whistle that calls everyone in from the fields. The children pick up these habits, weaving them into their own understanding of what it means to love and be loved. Sometimes you hear them reenacting your morning routine in play, imitating the way you greet each other at the door. Fringe traditions flourish in some corners. One tale tells of a couple who planted a tree on their wedding day, then celebrated each anniversary by tying a new ribbon to its branches. Another family is known for trading hand-carved tokens. A wooden heart, a spoon, a painted stone, each year hidden in surprising places. Historians still argue whether such customs were widespread or simply the inventions of particularly sentimental households. Long-term love is rarely a straight line. There are harsh words, lost tempers, and days when silence stretches long and thin. Yet there are also nights spent laughing over shared memories, hands clasped in the dark, gratitude blooming quietly even as hair turns grey. You realize as you watch the world outside your window shift from green to gold to white and back again, that these cycles of the earth, of the heart, are the true anniversaries, marking the passage of a life shared in full. Sometimes the whole village joins in. Couples celebrating 20 or 30 years together might receive a new quilt from neighbours or a basket of eggs from the church women's group. Children and grandchildren gather, eager to hear the how we met story, embellished perhaps with every retelling, but cherished all the same.
In these moments, you understand that love in colonial America is a mosaic of small things. The daily chores, the patience, the jokes and the rituals that endure. It's a love story, not of grand declarations, but of lives built side by side, quietly resilient, season after season.
Years slip by, and the once new marriage becomes the foundation for a whole web of connections. Children, grandchildren, neighbors, and newcomers who call you aunt or uncle, whether or not you share a drop of blood. As you look around your home, patched and rebuilt more times than you can count, you realize that colonial marriage customs cast a long, curious shadow shaping not only your life, but the lives of those who follow. Each generation passes along stories, advice, and the occasional warning. Your daughter's wedding is a little less formal than yours, but the same family Bible is brought out. The ink from your own entry now softly faded. The new couple faces some of the same rituals, the awkward parlour visits, the careful negotiations, the public bans, read aloud to neighbours still eager for gossip. You watch them, bemused, as they fumble through their first bundled night, whispering jokes through the wooden board, just as you once did.
Mainstream historical fact. Many colonial customs, bundling, bans, matchmakers, the practical exchange of goods, linger in American life, if only in gentler forms.
The importance of the community's blessing, the value placed on public record and reputation, and the expectation that marriage is as much about work as about romance, all echo in future generations. Children grow up watching their parents trade home-cooked gifts for birthdays, rely on neighbours in times of trouble, and celebrate anniversaries with eye instead of pearls. Yet, history is not a straight path. Some traditions fade away, replaced by new ways of courting, marrying, and making a home. Others transform. The marriage certificate replaces the Bible entry. Store-bought cake replaces the tough, nut-studded loaf. Some legacies like legal restrictions on who may marry are rightly left behind, debated by each new generation seeking to make love and family more just, more kind, and a bit more their own. Historians still argue whether colonial marriage customs were the root of modern American ideas about love, or a tangle that each era must slowly unravel.
You and your partner sit side by side, now as witnesses and elders, and sometimes as gentle jesters, quick with a story or a wry aside. You comfort the newlywed couple when their first feast burns, or the goats get loose and you offer advice that's half practical, half superstition, and all rooted in the long sweep of experience. Bundle up, keep the bands, and always remember where the best pie is hidden.
Quirky fringe customs continue to bubble up. The blessed path where eloping couples once hurried away is now a favourite spot for children's games. The annual broom dance at the autumn festival draws laughter and applause, even as the details of its origin fade.
Love in colonial America and beyond remains part ceremony, part survival, and always a mystery unique to every pair who takes the leap.
As the house quiets for the evening, you find yourself grateful for the odd mix of hardship and joy, routine and surprise that marriage has brought. You listen to the night sounds, soft voices, distant music, a snatch of laughter carried on the wind, and know that in some small way, the peculiar customs of your youth have helped shape a world that keeps turning, year after year.
Now, as the day draws to its gentle close, the rhythm of your life slows and softens, like the last few notes of a favourite lullaby. The air outside is cool and still, the sky painted with a delicate gold and silver of fading stars.
The household is quiet now, the fire's banked low, and even the youngest child is drifting towards sleep. You settle into your favourite chair, feeling the comforting weight of a handmade quilt across your knees, and let your mind wander back through the winding paths. The small sounds of the night become a soothing backdrop, the distant call of an owl, the soft sigh of wind through the trees, the familiar creak of floorboards that remind you of all the footsteps of love, loss, and laughter that have crossed this home. Each tradition, each custom, has become a gentle thread in the tapestry of your days, tying you not just to your partner, but to generations past and those yet to come. The stories of bundled boards, public banns, and quiet anniversaries mingle with the scent of wood smoke and baking bread, inviting peace to settle in your chest.
You close your eyes for a moment, grateful for the steady warmth at your side, for the company of memory and hope. In the hush, you find the world has grown softer, kinder, and infinitely more bearable.
You rest in the knowledge that, no matter how peculiar the customs or how strange the journey, the end is always the same, a home made rich with love, a heart made calm by time. Good night and sweet dreams.